Liza Lawrence here with episode 22, Devastatingly Peaceful. Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, a wife, mother, teacher, and miracle lover. If you're new to this podcast, this is what we do here. Each week on Miracle Monday, we celebrate awe-inspiring true stories from regular people like you and me. People who have experienced something surprising and wonderful that could be considered the work of a divine source. My desire is to help us recognize God's hand and His love in our lives, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Thanks for listening to the show. Now let's celebrate wonders and miracles together. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 16. Now the Lord of peace himself give you peace always by all means. The Lord be with you all. So in this episode, you're going to hear a story of a young high school couple who hid their unplanned pregnancy from everyone, including parents and friends, until the day the baby was born. As they made the decision to place the baby for adoption, you'll hear the divine orchestration step in. So in this episode, I'm really excited because we not only get to hear from Megan, the birth mother's perspective, but also from Brent, the birth father, and Leanne, the adoptive mother, and Hannah, the baby who was born. She's now 19 years old. Thanks for joining me in the movement that miracles still happen. And this is a fantastic story and touching from all 4 points of view. But first, I want to give a quick reminder to help support the podcast by sharing it with friends and family. 3 ways to support: subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify, Stitcher. Also, write a review. That helps spread the word. People read those reviews and it puts us up in the charts so more people can find us. And thirdly, please share with friends and family. I gave a challenge last week to just share with one person a week. Send it to them in their email or text them the link, and it will help spread the word about this uplifting podcast. This is a longer episode, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so I am here with Megan, and she is from Idaho, and she's going to share a miracle story that happened her senior year of high school. So excited to have her here, and Megan, let's hear what you have to say.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be on here, so thanks for having me. I remember from a young age, I knew that God wouldn't give us something we couldn't handle. And so I used to think, ooh, if I'm going through a really big trial, I bet there's going to be something really cool that comes from this. Not to say that it makes it any easier at the time, but in my senior year of high school, I got pregnant, and being the upstanding religious young lady that I was, I ended up hiding the pregnancy all the way up until delivery, really because I had told a couple of my best friends that I had had sex, and I totally got chewed a new one. And so then when I realized I was pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not telling anyone.
Just kind of afraid of people's judgment.
Yeah, I didn't want to let people down. Like, I just wanted to handle it on my own. I didn't want to burden anyone too. That was the thing too, is not only that I didn't want to be judged, but I just didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to just take care of it myself and take responsibility. And I knew somehow everything was going to be okay, even though I couldn't understand in that moment how. All along the way, I did feel like there was a bigger plan that I couldn't see.
When you first found out you were pregnant, what was your thought process there?
Oh man, I was like, oh boy, what do I do now? What was weird though, I guess, there was a lot of kind of tender moments for me, but even the day that I conceived, because I was able to isolate to a certain,
moment,
to a certain point in time. But I do remember even that moment, I was like, uh-oh, I think I might have just got pregnant. And I just sort of felt this sweeping peace from the very beginning. So I would get really nervous. And then, of course, when, months would go by and my period would never start. And then it literally got to where I could feel the baby moving, and I still hadn't taken a pregnancy test or done anything about it. And I just was like, I just needed to put my head down and get through each day. And I didn't know how personally to handle it, but I just somehow felt like it was going to be handled. And it's probably good that I didn't put a ton of thought into it, because at the blip of time that I did, my boyfriend and I went to Planned Parenthood. And that's where you go when you're in a crisis. And that's all I knew. And luckily for me, even though I did not get the options I had hoped for me, it just kind of reinforced that I was not going to find the answers by asking other people. And for me, it was a very spiritual time. It was very scary, but it was really reinforcing to me that this was out of my hands. This was a God thing. And so, yeah, I had the pregnancy all the way up until I had her in September of 99, which I graduated high school 5 months pregnant. And then my family found out when I gave birth to a full term 7-pound, 8-ounce baby. Thank heavens for late 90s fashion, because I could hide it in my baggy clothes.
Big baggy clothes.
Yeah. And other strategies and stuff.
So you gave this baby up for adoption.
Yep.
And tell us that process. Was it a prayerful process? What happened during that time?
Well, when I was actually in the hospital, I knew this baby was not meant for my mothering. Like, I knew she was not mine.
How did you know that?
I just could feel it. I hesitate almost to say it, that I didn't feel an attachment like I expected. I felt this love and like I needed to take care of her. But it was a different kind of, it was like I somehow needed to figure out where she was supposed to go. And so this nurse was giving me my vital checks and whatever, and she was just doing her usual chit chat. And I was like, this baby isn't mine, something along those lines. I was like, this isn't my child. And she's like, oh, you're placing her for adoption. That's wonderful. And I was like, what? Wait, come again? Tell me more. And that was literally the first time that it actually resonated with me, because I'm pretty sure that my boyfriend had mentioned it a couple times, but I was not listening to anything during the pregnancy. But then I was like, wait, tell me more about what that looks like. And so the adoption agency was called from the hospital, and they came down within hours with just a stack of profiles. And I was like, oh, okay. It suddenly started to all come together. And I was like, this is what it's supposed to be. And then how I knew, again, it was like not my doing, was looking through these huge stacks of papers and just reading these essentially one-page letters of families. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to choose a family, strangers, for this human child I'm holding in my arms?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it was definitely like lots of just calming my mind. And to me, prayer is it's like a heart connection. Like, I just was not necessarily being like words of Heavenly Father, help me know who to pick. It was just like I tuned in and I was like just waiting for that guidance. And as I was reading through these profiles, one of the things that stood out to me was that this family not only had a whole lot in common with me musically and outdoorsy, they seemed very vibrant. They also owned a Jeep, and there was like all these little things that I was like, oh, this is who I want to be when I grow up, right down to all these little details that may seem trivial, but there was just lots of these little nuggets. And I knew, it's like, I think this is the one. And my boyfriend felt really good about it too. One of my sisters was like, well, what about this family? Like, she kept plugging along, and I was like, no, these are them. I could feel it. I was like, this is the family. It was crazy.
That's amazing. And I know that feeling when it's like every part of your being knows the truth of something. And I do believe that is a spiritual connection at that moment of, okay, the Lord is guiding this experience. Yeah. And it was a Jeep. I love that.
Yeah, it was.
Good thing they put that in there, right?
I know. That sealed the deal. Definitely helped with my little young fantasy mind of what I would be when I grew up,
Yeah.
But what was crazy is, looking back now, I know that if it had to happen that way, because I might have let other people influence me. I certainly did, even after that point, once everything was out in the open. I listened to opinions and advice from church leaders and from family and whatever, and then really started to shift my immediate decisions at that point to move on with life, kind of listening to too many outside voices instead of really being like, okay, I just made a huge decision without these other influences, just between me and God. And thankfully, my boyfriend at the time, he was willing to be on board and be very loving and supportive along the way. And then, dang it, I let outside influences come into play. And then that set me on a trajectory for a whole bunch of other challenges. But what I love about it is some of these massive blessings, they were peppered all throughout, but they came full circle for me when I got to reunite 18 years later. I met her in person again right before her 18th birthday. It was awesome. We kind of knew in these years leading up, like in her late teens, it was like becoming real that we were going to have this opportunity to reconnect. And of course, we gave her all that decision-making power of like when the timing felt right for her. And we had already worked on this book together that I wrote and wanted to share the positive parts of adoption from our perspective. And then she decided, yeah, she wanted to do it before her senior year started. The Monday of that week, I filed for divorce after my 16-year marriage was just not salvageable. And then it was that Friday I got to reunite with her. So I was feeling everything that week, and just what a blessing it was for me to have an influx of love and family at a time that I was really struggling for this huge loss of not only the marriage, but that big family that's on that side to suddenly go, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I'm going to see all my in-laws anymore that I just love, almost 30 people of family that have been a part of my life, my whole adult life. And so it was not that they're replacing, but to just realize that love is infinite. There's room for more family. There's room for more love. So my love, of course, continues with the family that I'm not actively engaging with, but it was just such a peaceful thing for me to go, oh, there's more family. And to me, we're all part of this big family. Everyone here on earth, in my opinion, is part of a big family under God. And so that was really as much peace as I could possibly have got at such a big emotional time in my life.
Mm-hmm. Do you stay in contact with her too now?
Yeah. So oddly enough, it became a little bit of a challenge over the year of really navigating. Now we're wide open. Like, what does that look like? And the challenges and the fun that comes with it too, because a lot of it has been, I've only had contact with her through her parents, and now she is stepping into adulthood. And so it took a lot of navigating and lots of open communication and some missteps, a lot on my part. And now I have great relationships with Hannah, my birth daughter, and then Leanne, her adoptive mother. And now they're kind of branching off into the separate realms. So I communicate with both of them very often. And we have established these really awesome relationships and navigated through the challenges. And it's just interesting to see how there's so many layers and there's not easy parts of it that we're still just constantly learning. And I think that's what's so important about sharing stories, is to help people understand that even in our case, where it's, I think, probably as best case scenario as you can get, there were still a lot of challenges to navigate through, but so much joy.
Nice. So what do you think your biggest learning or growth has been through this whole experience?
I guess on the broad scale, it's really just embracing our stories, embracing the complexities of human relationships, and recognizing that there is such a big power overseeing us, and whatever that looks like to people. I don't really care what people call it. I just believe that allowing ourselves to live outside of our own minds of what we think that this life experience should be, and allowing growth and feasting on these experiences and learning and allowing our opinions to morph as we become more aware of what's going on in the world. I just feel like we could serve each other and make this whole mortal experience even more entertaining and tolerable when we just embrace those challenges and respect other people for how they show up, and it might be differently than us. But to me, it really levels the playing field. And so that's the biggest thing, is I truly have stepped outside of myself enough to go, wait a minute, there is a plan that is so much bigger than us. And when people struggle, I just love them that much more, especially if they haven't yet learned to roll with it. I'm like, oh man, you're missing out on all this joy. It's fun to see that as heavy as life is, there's just that much joy alongside it.
I love that. Anything else that you wanted to share?
My only other takeaway is that no matter what the challenge is, there's only so much of it that's ever going to be in our control. But we can absolutely level ourselves up and appreciate what we as individuals get to experience. Our journeys on this one time we get to be here, it's just so awesome when we can shift it into a change from victimhood into like, whoa, okay, this is what my journey is. What do I get to do with it? And how can I be a force of positivity because of it instead of be stuck in a victimhood state?
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. Well, tell us about your book. Not My Plan, Sucking It In Until I Had to Push It Out. I loved this book.
Yeah, I wrote that book actually when I was going through some big challenges in my marriage, and I thought I needed a good distraction. So why not write a book?
Right.
No, but really it was important for me to just put that alternative opinion out there that when there's an unplanned pregnancy, that there's a third option, because a lot of times people just talk about parenting or abortion, and not as often is adoption brought up as a positive, viable option. So that was one of my big goals. And also for me, it ended up being this journey into recognizing when I just poured my soul out onto paper, that it really explained to myself a lot about myself, that I like why I even got into comedy, and really recognizing that it was more than just a story of adoption. There was a lot of stuff about judgment and different things that came up. So yeah, I wrote the book just in a way to kind of cathartic through some things and see if it was something that I was capable of doing. And then it kind of launched me into this other space of just being like, oh, literally I've become an open book. Really shifted my ability to just be very candid and open in all aspects of my life. Kind of what my goal was with that book was, maybe this will help somebody somewhere. And maybe that somebody is just me, and that's also fine. So it was a fun journey and came together really nicely. And now it's a book people can buy anywhere online. And it's really exciting to see something become a tangible finished product as well.
Yeah, and I read that this weekend. It's called Not My Plan, Sucking It In Till I Had to Push It Out. I would recommend this really for anyone, and I'm a reader. I think you did a great job just being very honest and raw. And well, so I would recommend the book to anyone. So you can find it on Amazon. Do you have a website or anything?
So people could actually find me on social media. Sometimes people want a hard copy that I can autograph. I'm really easy to find on social media. Just meet Megan Bryant, or at Kooky Megan is my handle on different platforms. But people send me private messages all the time, and I can arrange for a hard copy as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, well, I'm here with Brent. He is the birth father of Hannah. I'm so excited that you were able to join me today and share your side of this unplanned pregnancy and adoption story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The experience has been an adventure. I mean, it runs a whole gamut of emotions, from holy crap, this is terrifying, to wow, what an amazing person she's turned out to be, and really fortunate to have a relationship with her.
With Hannah.
Yeah, with Hannah.
Tell us a little bit about when you found out Megan was pregnant. What were your thoughts going through your mind?
Whew, yeah, that's a tough one. Megan and I were dating and things were going pretty well. I think probably more mature than I think that either one of us were really equipped to handle. She had mentioned that, hey, I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant and we should get this figured out. So she made an appointment to go to the Planned Parenthood, and we went together. That experience on its own was pretty crazy. They tested and came back and said, really, it's too late to abort, so you're stuck. So I went back and I was like, hey, we need to tell our parents like right away about this. And she said, if you tell anyone, I will kill you. And that's how it stayed.
And so tell me, when that happened, what were you thinking? Did you really just want to respect her wishes? Because it is interesting that both of you didn't tell anyone.
Yeah, there was many times where we talked about, hey, we should tell somebody, or, you know, our parents should know. And it always came back to, no, this isn't really happening. Like this, we'll wake up one day and this won't be what's happening. A lot of denial. As little milestones would happen, like Hannah would move around in Megan's stomach, then it became more real, but she was super adamant that we couldn't tell a soul. My feelings for her at the time were so strong that I would do anything that she said. I didn't want to lose her, and so it just seemed best to just do what she said, even though it felt like we should tell someone. We continued to date and see each other, and there was good days and bad days. I think that days where she felt the weight and pressure on it, she was a lot more cold and distant, but we remained together through the whole thing. There was some times in our relationship that were a little bit more trying than others. Part of that kind of kept me away from wanting to go to church or to do things that were related to church. We belonged to the same church. And part of it, we had seminary. Here in Idaho is very popular release time to go do scripture study and to learn more about church as part of school, which is kind of interesting. Because of the friction that we had, I didn't really like going to seminary. So there was lots of days that I didn't, more often than not. But for some reason, one day I decided to go, and this was now my senior year. Megan had graduated and was going to college and doing her thing. We were still together, but one day I decided to go, and it was really interesting because that day they had a representative of LDS Family Services, which was an arm of the church that handled things like adoption and welfare. But that day they had a representative there, and he was actually talking about adoption. So it was really interesting to be there that day that he was talking about that, because here I have this pregnant girlfriend and we're not sure what's happening.
Yeah.
But in my mind, we were going to stay together and we were going to move into my parents' basement and we were going to have this baby that we were going to raise and we were going to be this happy family, even though that's not what she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So then just shortly after that, I got a call in the morning, really early, from Megan's sister who said that she was at the hospital. My heart just dropped. Like I knew it was the day of reckoning, so to speak.
Right.
My mom was out of town on a business trip and Megan's parents were out of town on vacation.
That is interesting. Both were out of town.
Yeah. So my dad was at home and he was getting ready for work. And I went to him and I said, hey, do you mind if I skip school today? And he said, yeah, fine. Didn't ask any questions. Didn't want to know anything. So I hurried down to the hospital and shortly after Hannah was born. And we were sitting there with this baby like, well, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
But we both knew that adoption was the answer. So I said, hey, that guy came to seminary. Maybe I could call him. We agreed that that's what would happen. So I went out into the hallway and found the phone number. And I called and said, hey, is Brian there? Who was the guy that had come. And he got on the phone. I said, hey, you came to my seminary a couple of days ago and you talked about adoption. And I'm actually at the hospital right now. And my girlfriend just gave birth to a baby that we think we should probably place for adoption. I said, oh, interesting. You're at the hospital right now? And I said, yep. And he's like, this wasn't something you were thinking about before? And I said, no, we hadn't really talked about it. And he said, okay, well, I'll come down. I'll meet with you and your parents. And I said, well, funny story. We actually haven't told our parents.
Oh.
And he said, well, you need to hang up right now and call your parents. I'll be there in a minute. I said, okay. So I hung up the phone and I called my dad at work and said, hey, I'm at the hospital and Megan just had a baby and it's mine. And he's like, oh no.
I'll bet that was a shocker call for him.
Yeah. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, we're going to put the baby up for adoption, but can you come down here? And he said, no, this is yours to deal with, which is really interesting because he is, to this day, the most supportive, loving dad anyone could ever ask for. So,
did you appreciate that response? Probably not in the moment, but later?
Yeah, I think even in the moment, it caught me off guard because I figured he would come in and save the day somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know what he would have done to save the day, but in retrospect, I think definitely it was the right thing to do because then it made me have to deal with the consequences of my actions. Like I had to be the one to stand on my own feet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that God, you know, there's a bigger plan for all of us. There was a reason why our parents were out of town. We were able to have that time in the hospital together to be able to kind of celebrate this birth and have that few moments of interaction with Hannah before she left and just be together. We were able to stay the night in the hospital together, which if our parents had been home would have never happened. But we kind of needed that time to talk about what was going to happen. And Brian came to the hospital and we were able to read through the portfolios of potential parents that Brian had brought and kind of feel connected to those people that were praying for this baby. Even though we didn't intend to have a baby, there was somebody out there that was praying for this baby and that was looking to complete their family. So it was really nice to be able to feel that closeness that we were able to have in the hospital because our parents were gone.
I love that. I do see some divine orchestration there, that it was just between the two of you. And had you had parental voices in there, it might have changed your decision or the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. I know that when the parents did come, I think that both sets of parents kind of stepped in as in, well, maybe we'll raise this kid. And at that point, we had already made a decision. You know, Megan was 18. I was still 17.
Mm-hmm.
But the decision had been made. We picked a family.
And how did you know who the adopted parents are?
Brian gave us the portfolio of a bunch of families and we read through them. I read first and I was like, wow, these people sound amazing. And I gave it to Megan and she read it. And we both knew on the first read that that's who it was supposed to be. When we read it, there was just such a comforting peace that came with them. Like, hey, we knew right away that that's who our baby was supposed to be with.
That's beautiful.
And then it was completely reaffirmed to be able to meet Hannah's parents, Wayne and Leanne. When they came in, you could feel a divine presence there, that what was taking place was what was supposed to take place, that we were the vehicle to be able to get Hannah here to her family. Like that is her family that she was meant to be with. It was one of the most devastatingly peaceful moments of my life.
Oh, that's such an accurate description, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And then it was determined from the parents that we weren't allowed to see each other again. That relationship needed to end, and it was best for everyone to just move on. That was one of the hardest things of all that, was that we had shared this secret together and we did everything together. And so we were the best of friends through the whole thing. So when Hannah left, we lost that connection with her, but then we lost the connection with each other as well, which was pretty hard to deal with at the time.
I'll bet.
It was really difficult because you're supposed to do what your parents tell you, but just to be able to cut off from your best friend is really difficult. So we ended up we'd leave notes on each other's car of, hey, I'll be at this place at this time. And we would get together and just be together. It wasn't so much romantic anymore. It was more just, I need somebody that's been through this to go through this with me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, as a birth father, there's so many birth fathers that are not involved. There was like no support at all for birth fathers. Like I heard him talking to Megan about different support groups and all these different things that were designed to help birth mothers cope with the placing of the baby and having that void filled somehow. But there was nothing for birth fathers. And so for that time, I was kind of alone. So the only people I really had to talk to were my mom and my dad a little bit, but he's less of a let's talk about feelings person. Right. So it was mostly just my mom. And then when I was able to see Megan, then we would get to talk. And at the time too, I would meet with my church leader, and which for me was pretty difficult, in some way was a bit therapeutic, but mostly it was just dealing with the guilt and more guilt put on.
Feeling it very shamed.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So we went through that. Megan was meeting with her church leader as well. And I think she was getting a lot of pressure to move on and get married and start living her life. And so she started dating and ultimately got married pretty quickly after all this took place. So I don't know if there was ever a real like, hey, we're over, but we ended up just kind of growing apart. And then part of the arrangement with the adoption was that we could send pictures and letters every year up until year 5 was the original agreement, which is interesting because we later found out that they didn't put the 5-year statute on Megan. They'd only put it on me. So then, as we both got married and started living our lives and having kids, we would see each other occasionally, but we really had pretty little contact with one another. And one day out of the blue, I got an email from her that said, hey, did you get the latest letter? She's getting so big and mature and so talented. And it was one of those other heart drop moments of what? Because I had been cut off and I had assumed that she was as well. So I had no idea that all along that there was this interaction. I immediately wrote back and said, no, I had no idea. I had gotten cut off. I thought that you had too. Will you share everything with me? I contacted Family Services and said, hey, I had gotten cut off. Why did this happen? And they said, oh, she was supposed to have been cut off too. What was her name? And I just hung up. Because I didn't want to be the one that ended that, because that would have been terrible. So it felt like there was a big chunk of time in there that I missed. I mean, because I did.
Yeah. It's so interesting that as a birth father, how much you desired to be involved, where I do think that's a bit unusual, and maybe not. I haven't talked to a lot of birth fathers. Have you talked to other birth fathers? Are they similar?
I think that most birth fathers, especially at that age, I think they feel like that's not my problem, or that's not something I need to deal with, where, the birth mothers, you can't run from it. So they're stuck. So I think for a lot of birth fathers, especially immature ones, they run because they can.
Yeah.
Which for us, like, I didn't want to run. I wanted us to be a family. So there was that connection as well.
Yeah. So it kept your desires wanting to be involved with Hannah's growth.
For sure.
So what was it like meeting Hannah?
It was cool because with social media and things, everything is more present. So we were able to follow each other on Instagram.
Before you met?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was when she turned 17. yeah, we started following each other on social and being more connected so we could see day-to-day glimpses. And then as adults, I was able to talk to her mom mostly and to be able to, start a relationship so that when we actually met, we were familiar with each other, which I think was huge because if we had just met with no other interaction, I think it could have been a little awkward.
Right.
It was really interesting because, we hadn't seen each other for nearly 18 years. But as soon as they walked in the door, it was as if we'd known each other forever. It never felt like strangers.
That's sweet.
When she came, I remember just holding her and like not wanting to let go. And we had this great time together and, we laughed. And there was many moments where I felt myself just like poking her. Like, are you real? Like, is this really happening?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And just staring and just in awe that she had turned out to be this really amazing person that was so talented and caring. And
Anything else you want to share?
I think that our era of when this happened, everything was so quiet and secretive and not discussed. And I think that made it way worse. So I don't know if there's a way moving forward to have it be more open and less taboo to talk about. Yeah. Which I know that has come a long ways. I actually, after Hannah was born, I had a conversation with my grandparents, and my grandma was telling me that when she was a kid, she had a brother that he and his girlfriend had a baby together. And they grew up in a small town in southern Utah. They sent him on a train to Chicago, and they never saw him again, really.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, not until way later in life did he get to be, I guess, reunited with his family. But they were so, he brought so much shame, that was the answer, was sending him away. Yeah. So I know that it's come a long ways. Yeah. It had come a long ways from that to when it happened with us. But
thank you for sharing your perspective on this and your story. I think it's rare to have a birth father so wanting to be involved. And so I think that's neat that you've kind of maintained that relationship.
I think it's a shame that more people aren't that way. Like the relationship that I have with Hannah is pretty incredible. I mean, we really are really, really close. And if I didn't have that relationship with her, I would be missing out for sure because she's a really incredible person.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I so appreciate you being willing to share.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we have Leanne, who is the adoptive mother of Hannah, and you are going to love hearing her perspective as well. So, Leanne, what was it like to get the news that you had a baby coming?
So we had put in our paperwork to adopt a second child. It was a 1.5 year wait. We were actually starting to lose hope a little bit. We had started to look into the route of foster adoption through the foster care program. And we had completed all of our paperwork for the state of Washington to foster. And we had had our final home study on a Monday. On Saturday of that same week, the phone rang and I answered it, and it was our social worker. And he said, "Is your husband at home?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can you get him on the other phone?" My husband got on the other phone and he said, "The baby girl was born 3 days ago and the birth parents have chosen you and you can come and get her on Monday." And he said, "But let me tell you the circumstances surrounding it." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "This young couple, the whole 9 months that she's been pregnant, they've hid the pregnancy from their parents, from siblings, from friends. No one has known except for the two of them. But she went into labor and her sister was the only one home. And after a couple hours of being in labor, she called out to her sister. She was laying in the hall and her sister said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I'm having a baby. You need to get me to the hospital." Of course, her sister was stunned and drove her to the hospital. And I just remember our social worker telling us this story and being blown away. And then he said that her parents were called on this vacation and told to come home right away. And I just remember being really sad for her mom, wondering the pain that her mom was going through, because I just know that if I had a daughter who had such a big, heavy thing that she was going through, and if she was too scared to come and talk to me about it, that would break my heart. And I just remember feeling sad for everyone, that the need was felt to keep it secret from the parents. But our social worker told us that we could come get the baby in a couple days. So we left that next Monday morning and drove to the same agency that we picked our first daughter up when she was adopted. With our first daughter, we didn't meet her birth mom, but this time the social worker said the birth parents would like to meet you. And we were really excited about that, as it always made me sad that I didn't meet my first daughter's birth mother. And so I was excited to be able to meet them face to face and talk with them. And so we got to the agency. Our social worker explained to us that the meetings would all happen before we would see the baby. Megan and Brent were the first ones in the room, and we just sat and visited with them. And I remember not being nervous because the adoption agents were able to ask questions and keep the conversations flowing. And it just seemed really comfortable being in the room with them and visiting with them. And I just remember they just seemed like a happy-go-lucky young couple. But I remember being really sad for them because the birth father said that not only was he saying goodbye to his baby that day, but he was also having to say goodbye to his best friend. As just the way things were with encouragement from parents, they were going to be going separate ways. And I just remember being so sad for them that they were placing this baby for adoption. That was such a huge thing, and they weren't going to have each other to lean on through that. And then I was able to meet both sets of grandparents. Just remember being sad for all of them, like knowing they were all saying goodbye to this baby. It wasn't just the birth mother and the birth father, but it was the whole family saying goodbye to a grandchild and
one that
a
they
niece.
just barely learned about, they
Yes,
hadn't prepared.
That's exactly it. Like, I remember looking at Megan's mom, just my heart breaking for her, knowing that she didn't even have time to wrap her mind around the fact that there was a baby and the baby was already leaving. I just remember knowing that that must be so hard. She didn't have time to prepare for those feelings. It was hard for me. My heart, was breaking that day for everyone. And I still am like really glad we were able to meet them. It was a wonderful experience. But as I drove away with Hannah, it was harder than when we drove away with Caitlin. I think not seeing our first daughter's birth mom, not meeting her, as we drove away, I just felt this immediate bonding with our first child. But with Hannah, it was a little bit harder because I just met the people that I was taking their baby away from. And it was more real, I think, that I really was taking a child from a family. And it was really hard. I remember sitting in the back seat with Hannah, just staring at her, and I could feel the miles growing longer and longer between us, like knowing I was taking this baby miles from this family. And I was having a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that she was mine. And I remember that night sitting in the rocking chair and holding her out in front of me, and she was asleep. And all of a sudden she got the biggest grin on her face and giggled. She was only 5 days old, and she giggled. And when that happened, it's like immediately my heart just wrapped around this baby, and I knew that she was mine. And I just started sobbing. And I just remember putting her up on my shoulder and just rocking her and just sobbing and trying to give her all the love from me, but from the family that I just took her from. I really wanted to pour everything that I could into her to let her know that she had a family who loved her dearly, and she was coming to a family that was going to cherish her. And it was wonderful, though. Her adoption was set up that we would write once a month till she was a year, and then once a year until she turned 18. And we were allowed to send pictures all those years as well, which I really loved. I loved the correspondence all throughout my daughter's life. Not only were we able to write those letters each year and send pictures and let them know that she was doing well and she was happy and we adored her and she had a happy life, but I also loved getting the updates from them to see how their lives were moving forward and they were having children. And that brought me a lot of peace when each one of those birth moms had their first baby. And Hannah's birth father, because we met him that day too, which is not the norm. Oftentimes birth fathers are not involved. And Hannah's birth father has always been very involved, and we've loved that, and getting to know him and his wife and children. And we were able to meet them all in person a year and a half ago, and that's been wonderful. And we're very close to all of them. Both her birth father and her mother and their families have stayed at our home, and we've stayed in their homes, and it's been wonderful. It's beautiful. I mean, open adoption can be beautiful. Adoption is hard. Adoption is heartbreaking. There's loss. there's pain, but there's also joy, and it can be beautiful. And if everyone opens up their hearts and just loves unconditionally, it can be amazing. And sometimes there's little bumps along the way that we've had to work out, but that's the case with any relationship.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. And really the miracle that I see there is when she smiled and giggled, feels like a message of, I'm happy to be with you. That almost a reassurance to you as your mom that everything's good and I am yours.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Well, thank you very much. So.
You're welcome.
So now we've heard all of the adults in this situation. And so now we have Hannah, and she was the child that was born and then adopted by Leanne and Wayne. So Hannah, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing with us your perspective of being adopted and going through this experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I love any opportunity I can to speak about adoption. I think what's unique for my sister and I being adopted to my parents were always very, very open about the fact that we were adopted. It wasn't like, all right, you're of age where you're old enough to know, we're going to sit you down and tell you. So I never had that like, holy crap, I'm not who I thought I was moment. My parents always raised us, you were given to us like a gift from your birth parents. And this was always God's plan for you. Like we were meant to be your family, even though we were born through a different family, like this is where we were meant to be in the end. And our birth parents were just the vessel to get us here. My parents always made it very open that our birth parents loved us and that they loved us and that everything in our lives is just out of love. And that was so important. We had children's books about being adopted, so it was something that we were very familiar with. I always got letters from my birth mom growing up and my birth father for most of my younger years, but getting letters from my birth mom was always like my favorite time of the year. Around my birthday, I'd get a letter every year. It was something that we enjoyed as a family for sure, that we'd read the letter from Megan and see pictures and get an update on what was going on in her life, and then be able to return with our own letter and be able to exchange what was going on in both of our lives. And that was so incredible. It's definitely a blessing to be adopted, but there are challenges with it as well. When you're figuring out how you fit in each other's lives, for me, being like, you're not my parents, but I am your DNA. And so I want you to be important in my life. I want you to have a great role. But at the same time, I do have parents that you picked out and you did a really good job. I'm loved, I'm taken care of. And I think for my birth parents stepping back in, they had to figure out as well, where do we fit, where we're not a parent, but we are important. And so I think the last year, having met them, it's been a year and 4 months ago is when I reconnected in person. And it's been overall amazing to be able to meet my half siblings and aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents. And that was incredible.
What was it like before you actually met them in person? What were you feeling and thinking?
I don't know if there's any way you can really feel totally prepared to meet your birth parents when it's something that you have been looking forward to your whole life. I think what's interesting in this day and age is I was able to connect with my birth parents through social media before I met them in person. My mom connected with Megan on Facebook a couple years before I did. And I think it was my 16th birthday. I sent her a friend request, and like that was just kind of surreal. And then I didn't anticipate that would be weird, because then I feel like for the next couple months I was like, Megan's going to be seeing everything I'm doing. So I want to like make sure that I'm not doing anything weird. I don't know. And because before it was just a letter where I could say what I wanted and she would only know what I wanted her to know about me, and vice versa. Whereas now it was seeing just day-to-day stuff, which was incredible, but also a little overwhelming because I became a little obsessed with like, what's she doing today? And like the first thing I would do every morning was look up Megan Bryant on Facebook and see, what's she doing today? What are her kids up to? But I think it also built up the anticipation. Like the summer that I met them, the countdown was real. Like when I knew I was walking up to her door, like one part of my brain's like, walk slow, take in the moment. But the other part is like, run. Like,
this is it.
This is the moment. Just having my family involved with it too. So it wasn't just like me going and meet my birth mom. My parents were there and my sister was there. And
so what was it like then actually meeting with the reunification?
It was so good. I just remember like the first hug with my birth mom, like smelling her for the first time was incredible. She has a mean head of blonde hair. And
Yes.
I feel like my face was just kind of consumed in blonde hair. And I'm like, this smells really good. And it felt really good. I've never been a really touchy person. And I was always worried, like, they're probably going to hug me. And am I going to be okay with it? And I loved being able to have that physical contact with them for the first time in really my whole life. And then again, 2 weeks later, when I met my birth father, having that physical contact for the first time was like, oh, I like this. I definitely felt like we had a really deep connection right off the bat.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
In what ways?
I feel like even though I really didn't know them that well, there was just a different feeling towards them. Like my spirit recognized them or something. And like, it felt good to be with them and to see them interacting with my parents was really good. You know, this is the mother that made me, but this is the mother that made me who I am.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest blessing you saw in being raised by your mom and dad?
I think the biggest blessing being raised by my parents was feeling their love for me through everything, and knowing that even though I wasn't biologically theirs, like that didn't ever change how they felt about me. And like, I wasn't like, we couldn't have our own kids, so we have you, and that's just going to be good enough. We were their kids. Like if I got bullied at school, my mom showed up in mama bear fashion, and my dad was always there, and they were my parents, and I'm so grateful for them. And I'm so grateful that my birth parents were strong enough to get me to them.
I love that. So Hannah is a singer-songwriter. So tell us about your CD.
I just recorded it from home. I someday will get in a real studio, but for now I'm a poor college student. And so I'm selling this CD. It's $5 for 7 original songs. And
they are beautiful. I have a copy of them and I love it. I really do. You've got a beautiful voice and you write your own songs and play the guitar. It really is beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
So where can they find this album?
The best way to contact me is through Facebook, Hannah Nicole, Hannah, and then Nichole. And then if you just message the page, then I can get your address and shipping information and get you a CD ASAP.
Well, thank you. It's been so fun to get to know you, actually. And I just think you're delightful.
Thank you.
All right. Wasn't that amazing to hear all 4 perspectives? Just a few reminders. Check out Megan's book, Not My Plan, Sucking It In Till I Had to Push It Out. You can find that on Amazon or her social media pages. And remember, you can message Hannah at Hannah Nicole on Facebook, and she can hook you up with her CD. So we are going to finish this episode with a song that Hannah wrote called I Wish. Remember to notice and celebrate the miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Now enjoy I Wish by Hannah Rickards.
I wish that I could make this go away. I wish I could make it all better. I wish you wouldn't have another rough day. I wish I could take you from this weather. I wish that I could wipe away your tears. I wish I could blow away the clouds and all your fears, make them disappear. But sometimes the wounds make us strong. So just hold on a little longer, and you can hold on to me. I can't promise you will never hurt again, but I can promise you will never hurt alone. I wish that I could hold you in my arms and shield you from the storm that's raging on. Keep you in a place you feel like you belong. I wish that you could lay your head down, close your eyes and just rest for a while. You don't have to keep your brave face on all the time. Oh no. Sometimes our So just hold